Before we jump into this, I do want to talk about something that Ashley just said. We all come from a different place. Absolutely. When Lori and I were first married, and she's not here tonight, my kids, they got a promise that they won't say, even though it's going to be recorded. But when we first got married, I remember our first financial fight that we had. We were in a small little apartment, and Lori would say a crappy little apartment. But I got a notice from the bank that we'd overdrawn. I had never overdrawn. And so we sat down and we started talking, and she got really upset. And I think out of sheer panic, and she had nothing else to say, and I said to her, I said, how could you not keep track of what was in the checkbook? And her comment to me was, well, I figured since we had checks in the checkbook, we had money in there. Now, we laugh about that, but there is some reality and truth to that. She came from a family that never talked about finances. They just never did. And she said, I never heard my parents talk about it. They never discussed it openly. I came from a family that we always talked about it because my dad was a business owner, and it was just part of our conversation that we had there. So I guess I bring that up to say, if you're here, if you're a significant other, spouse, or whatever, just know there's likely going to be differences that you have, and you've got to figure out how to work at it. We're going to be married for 40 years this year, and I would tell you this, there's been an evolution in our relationship with Lori and I, and the first thing is she actually can talk about finances now, and I can talk about colors. And so we've kind of switched from that standpoint. So I just offer that up for you guys from an encouragement standpoint. And if you don't know, my wife's a designer. If you've ever been around her, just come to our house. She makes curtains for different seasons. It's quite something. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. My hope tonight is that you guys take at least one thing away from this. It's going to be casual. You're going to do some group work. Okay, and one of the things that I want to steal from Joel before we get started, he said something in the sermon on Sunday, and I want this to be something you think about, because he talked about in Ephesians, he said, you know, what we need to go from is a crowd, which we have in here, to community. And I think that's absolutely important and so critical that you are here as a community. We're all fellow believers. You know, the other thing that I thought was so positive and it was so enriching to me is he said, you know, salvation is a gift, maturity, I'm going to screw this up. Yep, maturity is a choice. And I think when you go through here tonight, what I hope you get out of this is we're just going to take small steps. And that's all I expect you to take. Don't walk out of here and think that I've got it all figured out, because we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get going here. So let's jump into this. We're only going to be here for 3 hours, so we should be. No, I'm kidding. We won't be. We won't be. So let's just quick go through the agenda. So we're going to talk about the why. It's really important from a why standpoint. You know, we're going to just jump in. Matthew 25 talks about God owns it all. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and how that was portrayed in Matthew 25. Then we're going to talk about the baby steps. I've struggled through the years with the term baby steps because it always felt like it was kind of demeaning. But I think what I've learned from that is it's so much, think about not the maturity side of that, but it's you're just taking little steps as you go through. Baby steps are small little incremental steps. In order for you to be successful, that's what you need to take, and that's okay. I think that's by design. And so we're going to walk through those a little bit. Then we're going to do a little icebreaker, which you're going to talk amongst yourselves. Then we'll jump into an interactive budgeting lab. Okay, so we're going to have you do some work on that. We're going to talk about zero-based budgeting. And so we are going to talk about budgets because that's absolutely critical in order to be successful. And we're going to talk about the 4 walls, and we'll get into a little bit more with that. Then we're going to talk about, well, how do you handle debt? Pretty much everybody probably in this room has some type of debt, whether that's consumer debt, whether it's mortgage debt, And so we're going to talk about, well, how do you handle that? What's the methodology associated with that? And then you're going to have a group activity again, and then I'm going to have Sharon Hast, who is sitting down here in the front. We're going to kind of go around and make sure you guys are progressing on that. And then we're going to talk about some steps that we're going to get done, group discussion, accountability, and then what are your next steps. So that's the plan. If we get sideways, so be it. We're not going to worry too much about, just going through and making sure this is done exactly the right way. If there's challenges, we'll just work our way through those. So let's just, and then obviously closing and next steps for you. So think about from a scripture standpoint, Matthew 25, it's really about the parable. If you've been around church at all, you know what the parable's all about. It's about the master, and he gives talents. And some interpretations are that it's really bags of gold. And he gives 3 of his servants, one with 5 bags of gold, one with 2 bags of gold, and another one with a single bag of gold. And he talks about, what do you do? And he says, gives this to them and tells them, go do what you want with this. Well, it's really about, there's two things in that. One, God entrusts it all with that. But more importantly, if you think about it, each of us according to our own, ability. He gave somebody 5, he gave somebody 3, he gave somebody 1. That's the way, that was the whole point behind that. What he wanted to do was really to talk about the principle. He wants to hold us accountable from that standpoint. And then it goes on further in Matthew 25 where he talks about and says, you know what? It's really about, I want you to be stewards, not owners. One of the things that I learned early on when I was going through Ron Blue, if you've ever heard of him, one of the things that always has stuck with me was the symbolism that he used. And he said, what we need to do with the resources that God gives to us is do it with an open hand. And that open hand allows God to put in and take out as he sees appropriate. And so that's always helped me from the standpoint of thinking about it. I really don't own it. It's my job to steward that. And that's why I got involved with the finance team here at the church, is to say, all right, let's make sure that we steward what you all give to the church through your tithes and make sure that we do that appropriately. And the great news was, if you've been, if you heard or not, we're debt-free as a church now, which is absolutely incredible. Yeah. So let's talk about the baby steps, and we're going to move pretty quick because I want to leave time for you guys to fill out some things on your the worksheets that you've got on your table. So the baby steps was really the child of Dave Ramsey, and again, as I talked about, the baby steps are not so much about being a child as it is thinking about small incremental steps. And he broke this down into 7 steps. And if you're familiar with that, just bear with me because not everybody's going to be in here. But the first step is you should have $1,000 for an emergency fund. And we're going to talk a little bit about what does that take to get that. Because an emergency fund is not, hey, let's go out to dinner tonight, or, what about, hey, maybe we'll just go spend a day or two up in Traverse City. It truly is about an emergency of things that come in that are unexpected. So that's the first step. The second step is really about you want to pay off debt. Now debt is everything other than your mortgage if you have a mortgage. So that's consumer debt, that's credit card debt, that's student loans, which we all know is a big challenge, especially for this generation that's coming up. You've got anything else, car loans, people put those in there. So again, we want to get those paid off. Third one is 3 to 6 months of emergency funds. So once you get all of your debt paid off, then what you do is you build up an emergency fund. And those are things like HVAC unit goes out at the house. You have a car that has a major breakdown from that standpoint. We as a church, we take this philosophy and we do that. I think when I got up and talked a little bit about our finances, I told people the amount of money that we had in an emergency, in our emergency fund or cash, and they were taken back because, it was close to $500,000, and everybody kind of, as you can imagine, said, oh my goodness, but that represents 6 months of our operating expenses here. And so you put that into context. So that's what baby step 3 is really about. Baby step 4 is an invest 15%, okay? And so this 15% is what your gross income is. So if you have a 2-income family, single income family, but what it is putting in 15%. The other thing, I see people writing things down. Know that we'll have a QR code for this. We'll send this out, so you'll have access to this whole deck. So I should have said that when we started. So the invest 15%, that's for retirement. That's what that's intended to do. Then you start to look at baby step 5, save for college. If you want to talk, I've got a little bit different approach when it comes to college. And is from that standpoint about whether you should or shouldn't do that. If you want to talk to me about, that's fine. I don't think you have to be shamed into providing college funding for your kids, okay? That is going to be controversial for a lot of people. Now, if you have the means to do that, that's a different story. But I have a little bit different philosophy that I think if you're going to do that and your child's going to go to college, they have to have some skin in the game, okay? It's not an extension of high school and life. It's part of adulting. And that's what I think we want to make sure we do. But again, varied opinions on that. But you start saving for college, and then baby step 6 is really get the house paid off. That's what the intent is behind that. And then baby step 7 is build wealth and give. And I can tell you, Lori and I pretty much went through all of these steps at some point. And we're in baby step 7, and we are having a blast. I mean, it's a lot of fun. We get to do some things that, we worked hard for, we saved for, we invested in our kids, which are sitting over here. They can tell you that. We bought cars for them, but they weren't the best cars. A lot of them were rebuilt cars, okay? But we did those things for them, and those are the things that you get to do as you progress along in it. And it can be achieved. The number one, I think when they rank the millionaires, typically what you'll see in the top 2 are teachers, which is absolutely, and you know what we pay our teachers. And so I think what it tells you is they're very disciplined in what they do. They recognize the value they have. It's pretty simple. If you spend less than you make, you will be successful. That's it. It's as simple as that. Now, I say it's simple, but it's not easy to do, because I can just tell you this. You have, likely in your relationship, if you're in one, you'll have a spender and a saver. In our relationship with Lori, and the kids will attest to that, I am the spender. I can spend like nothing else, but it's always within context. And so that's the flip side of that for me, is I do like to spend, but it's always in context of, can we afford to spend that? And that's the question you always ask, is how do you take it from there? So, all right, I'm going to stop and pause. Any questions on these 7 baby steps? This is the interactive part, okay?
So the giving 10%, so that means from the top?
Yep. Well, and so Sharon asked a great question. What about tithing? Biblically, we believe you should give the first fruits, which is 10%. That's what we believe, and that's off from gross. That's not net. We attended a church, well, let me rephrase that. We visited a church when we were first married, and I asked them about tithing. And he said, well, at that point, he said, it's about 5.7%. And I said, help me out with that. How do you get to 5.7%? And he said, well, we figured you give contributions to school, to United Way, the whole bit. And then I asked the question, and I said, is that biblical? And I didn't really get an answer, but we didn't end up going there. That wasn't the only reason, but that was a reason that, Lori and I said, no, this is one thing that we believe that in order to be God-honoring, we need to do. And so, tithing is 10%. That's what we talk about here when we do. And we can chat a little bit more about that later if you have questions. Yes? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you didn't hear the question was, what do I do about if I have a house? Do I pay off my house, which is baby step 6, if I'm locked in at 2 and let's just say 2.75? versus. And other people will say, and you hear it all the time, well, I'm going to take that money. Instead of that, I'm going to go invest it in the stock market. First of all, for me, I'm allergic to debt. I don't want any debt. The freedom that Ashley talked about is absolutely a real thing. And so to answer your question, I would always recommend paying off your house first. Okay? Other people have different philosophies, and you guys get to make that decision. But being debt-free, when Lori and I paid off our house, this was the most anticlimactic thing we ever went through. We walked into the bank, we wrote the last check. The teller behind there wrote it out, said, yep, you're good to go. And we looked at each other, and I thought, I expected to at least get a high five from the bank teller or something. We just looked at each other and said, woo-hoo, and we walked out the door. That was it. So, but, Christy, to your point, absolutely, I would say pay off the house. Because the freedom that comes with that, we get to do things and make decisions and choices with money that if we still had a mortgage, we wouldn't be able to do that, or we would have to pause. I'll take it one step further. Before you go into retirement, absolutely, I think you should have everything paid off. There's no better feeling to know the only thing I have to do is pay my property taxes, pay my utility bills, and I'm pretty much good to go from that standpoint. But that's a really good question. Others? Okay, so here's the interactive part. This is the community part. So what I want you to do is I want you to share amongst yourself, in your group here, and we're gonna, I forgot who came up with it, but we're in the cone of trust. Okay, so if somebody says something at the table, you are responsible for trusting that you won't share that outside of here. But here's what I want you to do. Share a financial win or an emergency that previously caused stress in your life. So the financial win was a good thing, but an emergency that caused stress, that's the first question. The second question is, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about your finances, your financial life right now, what would it be? Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and if you're comfortable, share that at your table, part of the community part, and then we'll come back together, all right? So now it's up to you guys. Go. The reason I had you think about, really about waving that magic wand, if you take the steps and you incrementally do the things that you follow through on, you can get to that point. It's not just a magic wand. It actually will get you where you need to go. But it takes hard work. You're going to see, I'm going to just say it here, you're going to see a little bit later a statement that says 20% is knowledge, 80% is behavior when it comes to your finances. 20% is knowledge and 80% is behavior. You can read all the books you want, you can go through everything, but if you don't implement it, you will be less than successful. And that's what the whole point of what tonight is really about, is to hopefully give you some basic tools to help you get started, that you can take those incremental steps that you can ultimately end up winning. And winning can be a small little increment that today I chose not to do something. I chose not to spend money here because we didn't have it in the budget. That is one of the worst things that I think in the United States of America today that we really talk about is the statement of, well, you deserve it, you deserve it now. My kids are sitting here, they'll know, yeah, that doesn't happen in our household. Sometimes you deserve it, sometimes you just don't. And the answer sometimes has to be no. And you got to be okay with that, But if you're going to say no, especially to your kids, help them understand why. Again, it's behavior versus knowledge. Help them along the way. So hopefully that was beneficial. So let's talk about budgeting, everybody's favorite thing. It's really tough. One of the things that Dave Ramsey talks about in what we do is what we call zero-based budgeting. Zero-based budgeting is basically every month You sit down and you say, what's my total income? What are we going to have for the month? Then you say, well, what are our living expenses? What are the expenses we have? Listing all the expenses out that we have for the month, subtracting expenses from income, and then tracking those, and then ultimately make a new budget. Now, hopefully, when you take your income and you subtract your expenses, at worst, it's zero. So your expenses exactly match your income, and at best, you have some left over. But the whole point behind zero-based budgeting is every dollar that you have coming in should have a purpose. You should designate where do those dollars go, whether that's investing, whether it's paying, which we're going to talk about. We're going to go through and do some of those, utilities, student loans, but we're going to talk about how do you prioritize those things. But every dollar should have a place to go, because I can tell you this, what I used to do in our checkbook at home is I would have the income coming in, but I would split money out at different accounts, because we had a real tendency that if there was money in the checkbook, we would spend it. Tom would spend it. Probably not so much Lori. But we would look at that and say, well, we have money extra over. So what I did was use an electronic version of the envelope system, if you've ever heard of that, where some people take cash and they say, here's how much goes in each envelope. But I created an electronic envelope. So we had money over here for insurance. We had money over here for investing. Yep, hard copy. But that's how I helped manage me. And then Lori and I would sit down and go, okay, here's how much we have left. And sometimes when we were hoping, we got a couple of days left. Sure glad we're getting paid in 2 days, because right now there's this echo in our checkbook, and that's because there wasn't much left in it. But that's the whole point behind that. So zero-based budgeting is really about every month you sit down, you say, here's my income, here are my expenses, and then you ultimately end up saying, what do I have left? And then you start to track them. So, and then you just start all over again. I will tell you this, if you start doing this, it's going to take 3-4 months in order for you to get it right. Because if you've never done it before, it just takes time. And you'll start to figure out how much money should go in each category. Some things are pretty simple. Utilities are pretty much simple. Cell phones, those you kind of know how much we're going to spend in gas every month. You know how much your insurance is going to cost, so you need to put money. So there are some expenses that you should know, but then there are the things that are a little bit more variable that you're going to have to deal with. So it's going to take some time to get there, but you can get there. So a lot of people do the income minus expenses and find out they're negative. We don't have enough to pay all of our bills. So the first thing you have to ensure to make sure that you're comfortable is the 4 walls. Are you taking care of the 4 walls? So you've got in front of you a packet, and there's going to be an extra slide in there, or an extra piece of paper, because I didn't realize they did 2-sided. And so I ran off a bunch of additional copies and we handed them out. So that's on me. So that you should have one that talks about the 4 walls. So your first one should say 4 walls. We're going to walk through that, and I'm going to help define what those 4 walls are all about. We're going to use this as an example. So let's just assume your income was cut in half. All right? There's 4 items that you need to keep the lights on and keep your belly full that I think are absolutely critical. And in today's world, it is not uncommon with dual income families to have income cut in half for loss of job, change of job, medical issues, things that are out there. And so there's some basic things just for your own health and well-being that I think we need to go through and make sure that you cover. That first thing is food and groceries. And you'll notice what it says in there. No restaurants, or I thought it was funny, for fancy coffee. I'm a Starbucks guy. I don't drink any coffee, which is really weird, but I like chai tea. That's my kind of special thing that I buy. But food and groceries only. So bare minimum, you got to eat. All right, so you start with that. Second thing you do is you look at utilities. You got to pay your utilities. And that's electric, water, and then heat. Whether that's electric heat, propane, gas, from that stuff, because you got to keep the lights on and you got to stay warm. Okay? Absolutely critical, especially this winter. Okay? Third thing, shelter. Got to have a place to live. Okay? That's about rent. It's about, mortgage payments, and that includes your property taxes. Because the one thing, as long as you pay your property taxes, and if your house is paid off, they can never come take it. So it goes back to Christy's question about should you pay off your mortgage. If your house is paid for and you're paying your property taxes, they can shut your lights off, but they can't come take your house. Now, that's an extreme view, but it also is a very freeing view. Okay? So that's the third thing. And the fourth thing is transportation. And that's really about gas, and it's basic maintenance. Okay? You got to make sure that your car's taken care of. You got to change the oil. That's a short-term view. If you don't change the oil, you're going to run into issues down the road. Okay? What it's not is a new car fund. And when we use the term new car, that's new to you. Okay? Lori and I used to have new cars, but I think we've been married for 40 years. I bet you it's been 30 or 35 years since we had a new car. We always bought a used one. And maybe at some point I might, but I don't know. But we always bought a used car, and we're okay with that. I mean, get some really nice cars that are used out there. Okay? So those are the four things that I think you want to make sure that you do. At a bare minimum, that's before any minimum payments are due. If you've got creditors calling you and the whole bit, if you haven't covered these four things, you just tell them, thanks for calling. You'll have to call back next month. Okay? You just do. They're going to be rude. They're going to put pressure on you. But at the end of the day, you have to take care of food, utilities, obviously a place to live, and a car to drive. Okay? Any questions with that? All right.
You can live on beans and rice and oatmeal and eggs.
Yep, beans and rice, oatmeal, eggs. You'd be surprised what you can find if you shop. And that's why Lori does not send me to the grocery store, okay? Because the budget, food pantries. One of the things that I heard the other day and this isn't directly related to this, but was a little bit sad for me. If you don't know, Hillary Lewis runs, she has clothing for foster care, runs out of Middleville, at Journey in Middleville. They have stopped taking donations because they have too much stuff. And living in Caledonia, we've moved to Hastings, okay? And I know in Caledonia, if you look at what Don Lemon's doing over in Dutton, the need exists out there. And what I'm afraid of is two things. Either one, people don't know about it and they're not taking advantage of it, or pride gets in the way. And those two things, so if you know of somebody that needs clothing for, small kids, cribs, they have all kinds, they have pack and plays, they have all kinds of things there. If you know somebody that you see kids, I heard a story from Hastings, a friend of ours, a Hastings teacher there, that a child would come in and they would either give them their old coat or they would pool money together and go buy a coat for them. There's coats at Journey Middleville. So if you know that exists out there and that need, send them that way. Or just go get it for them if you have to. Get a hold of Hillary Lewis, because it was really, to me, it was really sad that we have these resources and we know there are kids and we see them every day in our communities that don't have, good clothing and different things. So that's a plug for Hillary and the great work that she's doing there. Okay? So again, food, utilities, rent, transportation. Okay? Those are the things that are absolutely important. So you got a worksheet that you had there. It's a budget worksheet. So what I want you to do, it's multiple pages. So just go in there and circle those four things, because hopefully you'll take this home with you and you'll start to use this as a tool. And again, we'll have all of this available for you that will be available online, that you'll be able to go out, click on a QR code, and then you can print them off. But you should have a budget. So go in there, find those 4 things that are in there, and circle them at the high point. Okay? There's a good question that was just asked. Would you circle insurance? By law, you're supposed to have insurance for your car. Okay? So I would say, yes, you could circle that one. Now, we all know that's not the case. People are driving around. They'll get it just long enough to get it. But if you get pulled over, you'll end up in at least either Kent County or Berry County courthouse paying a ticket. So, but yeah, okay? All right, looks like everybody's got those. All right, so let's talk about the triage test, okay? So if you only had $2,000 this month, but your total bills are $3,500, obviously what should get paid? The 4 things. Thank you. Pretty simple. We've covered a little bit of this. What do you think doesn't get paid? Cable and internet, unless you work from home. We know we have remote workers now, but if you have to choose, cable and internet is a luxury, okay? It truly is. So cable and internet, and I would challenge all of you that go home and check out how many subscriptions you have. Netflix, Discovery Plus, just go down through those and look at those and say, do I really need those? Dining out. Yeah, it's only $10 though to go to McDonald's. $10 sometimes. What's that? I'm talking about just for me. Okay, just as an individual. Yeah, I know. We got the kids. 2 of the littles were over today. Those are our grandkids, and went to Culver's, and it was $32 for the 4 of us. And those are kids' meals. So, yeah. So dining out, you should never end up dining out. And unfortunately, we live in a society that says, well, I deserve this. Well, not really. If you can't pay your bills, you really don't deserve it. Okay? All right? And the last thing, you look at this, debt payments, even your minimum payments, if you can't meet your 4 walls, those 4-wall things, you don't have any business to even paying the minimum payments. The debt collectors can wait. They can get ugly and nasty, and again, I said that earlier. It is not your responsibility to make sure they get paid. Are you obligated to do that? Yes. You're going to have to deal with it at some point. But if you can't, feed your family and have them a place to live and be able to get around, that doesn't matter, okay? So again, we're talking about extremes, but I can just tell you this, the experience I've had and the people I've worked with people on both ends of the spectrum, where you had some that are, are doing great, some that aren't doing great. And I will tell you, income doesn't have anything to do with these 2 groups. Okay? There are poor people that are making over 6 figures out there today. That is a hard truth and a reality. And for, us sitting in this room, sometimes you think about that and go, well, how can that be? They are living paycheck to paycheck. Okay? So it's not poor or rich. It's behavior from that standpoint. So those are the 4 things on a triage if you have to. If you're in that situation, you may have to take that step and just say, that's what I'm going to focus in on. And the other thing, it's not forever. It's just for a time period. Everything we talk about in here today is not forever. It's just for a time period that if you make the steps, you change your behaviors, you will work your way through that. Okay? So let's talk about the debt snowball. This is an interesting concept. And we're going to talk about one other thing. So when Dave Ramsey talks about debt snowballs, okay, so you've covered your 4 walls things, then what you're supposed to do is you list your debts, smallest to largest. okay? Not in what it's not is it doesn't matter about interest rate, okay? A lot of people say, well, why would I do that? The intent behind the process is you will be between 18 and 24 months. You'll try to get to that point. If you do this right, you will be in a much better position where interest rate really doesn't matter. Because if you think about it, if it's an 8% interest rate or a 28% interest rate over 2 years is not that much money. And so the idea, and you'll understand why this is important once we go through this little exercise. So what you have now is you should have on the back side of that first one with the 4 walls, okay? You should have something that looks like this, okay? It's that. So this is a simulation. So it's the Miller family. So the Miller family, and if there's somebody named Miller in here, I apologize. I just picked one out of the blue, okay? If you're the Miller family, what they did is they went through the process and they found an extra $500 every month. Now, when I say found, they found it because they took the steps to decrease their spending, okay? So what they did is they've got some extra cash now. So what you have is you have basically 4 random debts. So what I want you to do is follow the instructions here, okay? So they've got a car loan of $7,000, which is $135 for minimum payment. They got the medical bills, which somebody talked about, you know, with a $50 minimum payment. Student loan at $10,000, $96 minimum payment, and credit cards $2,500 with $63 minimum payment. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to rank those, so below where the discussions are, put those smallest to largest in order, and follow the steps. Then I want you to determine which debts to attack, and then roll the snowball. Do people know what roll the snowball means? Okay. So here's what this means. You take that extra $500, you take your smallest debt that you have on there, and you apply that and determine how long does it take me to pay that off? All $500. Okay, so that's your first exercise. Okay, so I want you to put them largest to smallest, take that extra $500, apply it to the smallest one until that's paid off, and determine how long does it take you to do it. So remember, this is monthly. So we're going to. Oh yeah, all the other bills are. This is the extra $500. 4 walls are all taken care of. 4 walls are all taken care of. So you've got $500, and so you take your smallest one. How many? So let's just do this. We'll just do this together. All right. So what's the smallest debt you have there? Medical bills, $500. So how long is it going to take you to pay it off? 1 month. Okay. So for the second month, what's the second smallest one? Credit card, okay? So how much money do we have to apply towards that? $550. And why is it $550? Because of the $50 you already paid off your medical bill, so you took the $500 plus the $50 that you don't have to pay the medical bill anymore, and you apply that to the credit card. So this is the math part, okay? How many months is it going to take you to pay that off? All right, quit being a cheater over there, Carrie. So, how many months? 5 months. Why is that? $550 minus $2,500. Next month, $550 minus $1,950, if I did the math quick in my head. Okay? Then you got $1,950 minus $550 until that's paid off. So it's roughly about 5 months. Okay? Nope. Initially, you're not. Initially, you're not. Yep. You could, but for this exercise, it's easier if we don't. Yeah, for this exercise. Yeah, for this exercise. Now, you're assuming you're making the minimum payments anyways. Okay, so you're assuming you're making the minimum payments there. But I would tell you, depending on your circumstance, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Okay, but if you've already put that into your budget, you should be paying those off, and that's a good question. So what's the third largest one, or smallest one? Car loan. All right, how much money do you have to put towards that? So 500, right? Plus 50 is 5,500. Plus you paid off the credit card, right? Which is 63, right? And your minimum payment, but we'll leave it at that. So 613, is that what it was?
Yep.
Okay. So how many months is it going to take you to pay off your car loan? 11 months. Okay. All right. Is this making sense to everybody? Okay. Because as I was talking to Lori the last couple of days, she said, just remember, some of us think in colors, some of us think in numbers. Okay? All right? So, all right. So then what do you have left? Student loan, right? So how much money do you have to put towards that? So 613 plus 135, right? 748, okay? And put 748 into 10,000. How many months is that? 13 months? Is that what it is? I didn't do the math, so you guys, I'm hoping you're right. Okay? So, the whole point about this is the debt snowball is about gaining momentum. And it's the little wins. When you get to pay off that first medical bill, that's a big deal. You should celebrate that. I no longer have a medical bill. That should be celebrated. And then when you get to the next one, which was your credit card, if you haven't cut it up already, you probably should. And I will just tell you this, you do not have to, people will say, well, I need a credit card to rent a car. No, you don't. You can do it with a debit card, okay? You don't need that to rent a car, okay? Debit card has the same protection that a credit card does. The difference is in a debit card, they take it out immediately. Credit card, you float 30 days, okay? So here's what's interesting with that. It took you 1 month to pay off your medical bill. How many months was it? 4 months? 5 months? Okay, so now we're at 6 months, right? Okay, and then how much longer did it take us to do the car loan? 11, okay? So that's 17 months. You have paid off $3,000, $10,000. All because you were disciplined enough to start with, first of all, you ended up with an extra $500 that you found because you cut your budget. You cut the subscriptions, and let's say maybe you got rid of cable for a few months, or you don't have, the full plan on your mobile phone, okay? Unlimited data. I've heard people getting track phones to handle it that way, different things. You can take your numbers with that. But the whole point behind this, and that's why the interest rate doesn't matter. If you look at those three you paid off and in less than 24 months, if you were to look at the interest rates for those, it probably wouldn't have amounted to very much. But the whole point is the Millers found $500 that they were disciplined enough to say, we're just going to keep doing that. And I will tell you this, when you start paying things off, it can be intoxicating. And you need to celebrate that either with your significant other or somebody that's helping you be accountable, or your friends, and just tell them. They're going to look at you at times and think you did what? But again, the whole purpose behind it is to do what makes sense for you, that you can steward what God's given to you. That's the critical piece out of this. So questions about that? And don't celebrate with new debt. Oh my goodness. And don't buy a new car, new to you, unless it's broke, unless it quits running. What other questions? So again, first thing, take care of the four walls, okay? Just get those taken care of. Make sure you have a place to live and and you've got food to eat. Next thing you do is say, okay, what am I going to start looking at? Where do we have ways to cut? That's what the Millers did here. They just went out and said, okay, where are some areas that we can start to cut back on? And I will say this, if you start this process, you will have a setback. If you don't have a setback, then I would say you probably weren't trying real hard to start off with, okay? Because it's hard. it is hard. It is hard to tell yourself no. It's hard to, I can tell you this, Lori would laugh if she were here. When I retired, it changed how I thought about things because I would go out and buy things because I knew I had income coming in. Well, when you retire, you do have income coming in, but it's a little bit different. It's a little more at risk. You know, I don't get Social Security until I'm 67, and I've got a few years before we get there to that, and it will be there. So you can debunk all of that in some form. Something will be there. But it just, it caused me to question, do I really need that? And there were some decisions where I said, no, I'm not going to. Okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the debt snowball. Yeah. Derek asked a question and said, well, if the Millers have finally paid off everything, what should they do with that $500? Which is really baby step 3. So baby step 1, here, let me just run back to it really quick, see if I can make my Mac work the way it's supposed to. I can't find my cursor. Okay, baby step 1 is $1,000 in an emergency fund. Baby step 2 is pay off all your debt. Once that debt's paid off, then you're working to get 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund. And that's for your basic expenses. It goes towards that. You dump it into savings and start building it up. And they always give a range 3 to 6 months because depending on where you're at and how much debt. So if you don't have, let's just say you don't have much of a mortgage or you don't have 3 months, 6 months, it just kind of depends somewhere in there. I would say as you're starting out, look for 6 months. You know, especially depending on your income too, because everybody knows if your HVAC goes out or if your heating unit goes out, if your car dies, it's a problem. Yeah. You pay it off. You go down to $1,000 and you take all that money and go towards it and you just dump it right at debt. Now, that's assuming you're going to go through the baby steps and you're going to find money to start, you know, paying that, you know, to go after. So to start building that once, if assuming all of that pays off all your debt, then you start building it back up. If it doesn't, you keep going after it. You keep going after the debt with the money that you had. Yep. Yep. His question was, or his statement was, well, that's even more anxiety because I have a cushion over here and I just used it to pay everything off. That's real. I can't tell you. I'm just telling you the time period that if you do this right, it will be less than a year and you'll be in a much better position. Now, the $1,000, if you have to, unfortunately, and I'm going to say this, and this is probably contrary to Dave Ramsey, if you have an emergency fund, then maybe you do have to put that on a credit card from that standpoint. Go ahead, Sharon.
Mm-hmm. Job is very secure, then it's more comfortable to go ahead and use that savings to pay the debt.
Yeah, the other issue too, the other issue with that is if you're looking to have a baby, then you pause on the baby steps on debt too until you make sure you have enough. So when the baby's born, you're in a good financial position. So you just go back to doing the minimum payments and just keep building up a little bit money on the side to make sure that mom and baby come home. There's not a financial burden that comes along with that if there's if there's some type of issue during that. So so those are good clarifications. There's always, if you ever listen to Dave Ramsey on the phone, or on the radio, he is absolutely militant that there is no deviation from this. And I know why he does that. Because if he doesn't do that, people will say, yeah, but my situation's different. But I will tell you, if you look at the millions of people that have gotten through this process and became debt-free, it's because they were militant. But that's a good question. You know, theoretically, assuming, as Sharon said, job is safe, you know, your money's gonna come in, you're not looking to have a baby, then you would take that 3 to 6 months and start paying down the debt. Now, hopefully, what you'll see is once you pay down as much as you can, you'll get not only what you were putting in savings, but you'll have, if I paid off three things, I'll have all of that to pay off the last thing and then start building up. And that will happen really fast. That's why they say take what you have and pay off the debts that you have with that emergency fund. So go back to $1,000. Now, I would say in today's world, 1,000 used to make a lot of sense probably 10, 15 years ago. $1,000, I don't know if you can take your car in and get out without paying $500 anymore. So again, you might want to say 2,000, you know, but along that line. But the intent behind it is if you're going to do that, you have to be disciplined enough to then continue to go after that debt and get that paid off. And then start building yourself back. You'll get done with baby step 2. You'll go to 3, which is 3 to 6 months. And then you go to 15% of your income. I also get questions about, well, what do I do for retirement savings? The fundamental principle behind this is they would say, you stop it and use that money to pay down debt. Then the next question comes, yeah, but the company matches it. I'm losing out on, you know, some cases 50%. The time period that you're talking about, if you do this right in that 24 months, isn't a whole lot of money that you're losing out on. If you think about the interest you're paying, more than likely paying off that is going to offset what you would have got with your matching contribution. Okay? So those are things that people talk about, but it all is predicated on changing your behavior. If you don't change your behavior and you do these steps, it's not going to work out. It's that simple. It's math. It truly is math, but it's also behavior. But great question. Thanks for bringing that up. All right. Okay, we talked about this. We kind of did that. So the Millers cut their lifestyle. Yep, we did all this. This is what these were the answers to it. But I think it's better to engage this way. So here's what I want you to do at your table. How much time do we have? Does everybody know how this is? It an hour and a half? Hour and a half. So we've still got time. Okay. So here's what I want you to do at your table. So what's the biggest thing holding you back from starting baby step 1 if you're not there? If you are there, share with them what's the biggest thing holding you back to getting to baby step 3, which is 3 to 6 months, which likely is going to be debt, but maybe talk about that. But just start with that. What's the biggest thing holding you back from saving for baby step 1? So this is the community part. Those are all legitimate reasons. The question you have to ask yourself is, how do I overcome those? What are the things that I need to do? What are the hard decisions I need to make in order to overcome those? And it goes back to the budget worksheet that you have there. Take care of the things, the 4 pillars, the 4 things that matter, and then say, you know, what are the things then I can potentially cut out? Because I could tell you pretty much everybody in here likely has some things in their budget that if they were to go look at that, they would go, yeah, I probably don't need that. Yeah, I probably don't need that. And it's not forever. That's the whole point. It's not forever. It's for a time period. Okay? It's just for a time period. Are you willing to make those sacrifices? Okay? The other thing to think about too in this, and Sharon brought it up, is tithing. You know, we have a responsibility to honor God and do our tithing. And that's a personal decision that you have to make. And if you believe that it's part of what we're required to do, then you find a way for that to work out. I can just tell you this, Lori and I at times, when things were tight, it would have been real easy for us to go, you know what, we're not going to pay our tithe this week. You know, we're just not going to do that. We didn't. We just said, and it didn't work out this way all the time, but most of the time when we were tithed, somehow we were okay. And it wasn't somehow, it was God's provisioning on our lives that made us okay. And I believe that because I believe we have a huge God that understands our circumstances. And if we honor him, he will honor us. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, because it's not. Being a Christian is pretty tough sometimes. But it's, but God will honor us. So what are some resources that are available? Every Dollar app is a free if you go out, and again, we'll get this out for everybody, but Every Dollar app, if you're, some people like to use paper. I'm an electronic guy. Everything goes into Quicken for me. I can just take care of everything, but Every Dollar app is pretty simple. You can link it to your bank account. It will likely help you, in a lot of cases, categorize things, because the key is you got to figure out where am I spending my money to start with, okay? And so download the app. You can connect it to your bank. If you're concerned about theft, electronic theft, and that, I don't have an answer for you. Just because, sure, it exists out there and it potentially can, but banks will cover if somebody hacks, the bank will cover that for you. But I download that app from that standpoint because it's free.